back to my Dracula book club series. Thank you so far to the 3 people who have checked out my first video. I think 2 of them might have been me clicking on my own video, but one of them I know wasn't. So whoever you are, thank you. Thank you. Today I'm going to be talking about the second section of the book, which spans up until 202. And this is through chapter 14. So we're doing chapters 9 through 14. And, you might notice, sorry if you see the paint on my hands. I've been working on an art and crafts project. My mom had this dollhouse, and it's gotten pretty old and worn. And so I'm remodeling it to be a spooky haunted house. And here's the evidence. Oh, I always forget this thing's mirrored. Sorry, I'm always grabbing the wrong hand. But the evidence of my painting and crafting. Maybe I can put... See, I always forget it's mirrored. Put some progress shots here maybe so you can see how it's going. But that's going to take a little while. So I'm just now painting the exterior. Got lots of interior work to do. Got to get some fake plants. And I've never done a dollhouse before. So if you have hints or tricks or places you source stuff from for dollhouses, someone out there watching this is really into dollhouses, let me know, because I'm new to this. This is a completely new project for me, and I'm very excited. Maybe I'll post about that separately. But all right, let's get into section 2 of this book. So like I said, I'm reading the 2015 Barnes & Noble edition, but I didn't say it. I did put a little note in the last video, but this book is available online for free. If you just Google Dracula full text, you can find it on Project Gutenberg, and I think SparkNotes also has a full text version, so you don't have to get a physical copy. You can get it online for free. So chapter 9, we hear from Mina again. She had left to go tend to Harker, who's recovering from brain fever at a hospital in Hungary. And so she's writing Lucy to kind of fill her in on what's happened in the meantime. And she's talking about being at Jonathan's bedside, and this urgency that they need to be wed to get married. They're pretty dedicated to the idea of getting married as soon as they can. I think they were kind of, maybe this scare of him being missing and then being so sick kind of made them feel like the moment is now. And so they are asking the nuns at the hospital to wed them. And also in this process, Jonathan, as he wakes up, obviously Mina is anxious to know what happened to him, and he's still, unsure if it was fantasy or a dream. He can't even really bring himself to talk about it, so he gives her his full journal as kind of this indication of trust and says, this is for you. This is how much I love you. I want you to have this. And she kind of makes this promise, like, I won't read this. That's how much I care for you, and how much the only thing that matters, is our love or whatever. I would have read it, but I don't think it would mean that I love Jonathan any less. I'm just curious. I want to know. But maybe Mina is a little bit stronger willed than I am. So they're wed. And Lucy, writes back, and she expresses how excited she is for Mina. But then we learn that Lucy's not sharing this kind of darkness that's come into her life. She has become very ill and has this malady, this illness that she can't even really describe, but she's feeling very, very down and dark. And in her journal, she starts journaling because of Mina. She takes an example from Mina, starts journaling, and she kind of confesses that she's not letting on how bad she feels, and also that her mother's health is, so fragile. And like I said last time, I was a little bit wary of her fate. It's not looking good. Sorry to all the Lucy fans out there. It's getting a little dire. So dire, in fact, that Arthur Homewood, her fiance, reaches out to Dr. Seward as you'll know, is one of Arthur's friends, but also a former suitor of Lucy's who was rejected. And he asks Seward for his help as a physician to take care of Lucy, to see what he can do about her illness. And of course, Dr. Seward, he, you know, obviously has affection for Arthur, but a deep, deep affection for Lucy. That's very apparent in this section, that Seward's not over Lucy. And that's a big motivation. His love for Lucy is a big driver for him. And so he agrees, and he spends time with her and realizes it's not so much a physical ailment. He can't really pinpoint it to a singular uh, physical illness. He can't really come up with a diagnosis. So he reaches out to his mentor, Van Helsing. Famous character, Van Helsing. I think he's become popularized as like the most famous vampire hunter in pop culture. But we first are introduced to him as this very smart, very accomplished man with many degrees, and he taught Dr. Seward. John was his pupil. So he's reaching out because essentially Dr. Seward's out of ideas of what this could be. So he's reaching out to the smartest man he knows, his mentor, who is living in Amsterdam, and he reaches out to see if he will come. And we learn that Van Helsing has a deep, deep affection and gratitude for Seward as well, because Seward apparently saved his life. It seems like he owes Seward a big debt of gratitude for something. It sounds like he may have saved his life. They don't really get into the details of that yet. So Van Helsing's very responsive. He's eager to help out a friend, and he's like, a friend of yours is a friend of mine. And again, that theme of friendship that I talked about in the first section, is very strong here. I mean, Van Helsing really does this at first, at least as he's describing, out of the goodness of his heart, but primarily because he wants to help a friend that he cares so deeply about. You learn, as his character becomes more prominent, he doesn't seem to have family. It seems like maybe his family his family members have passed. He seems to be kind of a solo guy. So he seems to enjoy companionship. But also, something that doesn't become quite as obvious are really his motives, or how much he knows throughout this book. Okay, I'm going to kind of squeeze chapter 10 and 11 together. There's a lot of, related plot points happening in these two chapters. But basically, it's this ongoing recounting of Seward and Van Helsing trying to figure out what's going on with Lucy and take care of her. Again, told through journal entries and, letters and things posted to one another. So a lot of it is Dr. Seward recounting things. Van Helsing doesn't have his own journal entries in this book per se, so we're not privy to maybe his thinking. We do get a letter here and there that he's written, or a notice that he's posted to somebody. But it's not so much the interior side of Van Helsing. Instead, it's more reflected through Dr. Seward and his kind of interpretation of things. He's recounting what's being said, what's being done, but he doesn't know what's going on in Van Helsing's head. Van Helsing comes to the same conclusion as Dr. Seward, that Lucy's illness is not related to a known physical disease, illness, ailment that he can pinpoint, and instead it's something a little more, not esoteric, but a little bit more mysterious, or something that requires more investigation. And I get the sense throughout these chapters that Van Helsing is several steps ahead of the other characters. He seems to be putting the puzzle pieces together and not exactly giving all of the information to everyone involved. He's kind of doing a slow release as he needs to, giving the information he needs to give out, but he's not outright going, you know what? I think this is a vampire. He, does other things that indicates he has a sense of knowing. Like he gets garlic flowers for Lucy to wear and to put around her room and to kind of rub the fragrance of garlic in the room as a deterrent. Again, classic vampire strategy. They don't like garlic. Garlic is a deterrent. So that's an obvious indication that he has some inkling and some knowledge perhaps of the lore, or some knowledge about vampire characteristics. And he notices the puncture marks on Lucy's neck and notices that part of her symptoms is a low level of blood. And so what he starts doing is that he recognizes, Arthur would do anything, obviously, for his fiance. So he's like, urgently, Arthur, we need your blood. We need your blood. We need to do a transfusion. Lucy needs blood. She's low on blood. And Arthur's, of course, like, anything. He, for my wife to be, my love, I'll do it. I'll do it. Take my blood. She can have it. My blood is her blood. And so they give her a transfusion, and that seems to really help. That seems to be an important treatment for her, for whatever is afflicting her. But they seem to be, you'd think that could be the end. She's got new blood, they've got people watching over her, but somehow every night, either, one night Dr. Seward's resting in another room and Lucy assures him like, oh, I'll keep the garlic on, I'll be okay. But then in her sleep, her mom removes the garlic. So of course, Dracula, which they're not saying, they don't know yet, but we as readers probably can piece together that Dracula's coming in at night and taking her blood, sucking her blood. He gets back in, and the next day again, she's worn out. She's barely conscious. She's very low on blood. So, now Seward, another man who loves Lucy, has to give up his blood so that she can be replenished. And again, that seems to work. But again, once again, thwarted. Van Helsing has to urgently leave. He messages or sends, a telegraph to Dr. Seward asking him to come look over Lucy and assumes that he'll receive it and come in time. However, there's a delay in the postage because of a missing component of the address, I think county or something. So Seward doesn't get the telegraph until hours later, far, too late. And so he rushes back to Lucy's home, and there, he, is met with Van Helsing, and they're realizing that this is really bad, that no one was here overnight with Lucy. Again, something seemed to be working against them. And so they're trying desperately to get in the house. Meanwhile, we get a note. We get a letter from Lucy. She's writing this, really trying to describe what happens because she's fearing that this might be her last night. This might be her last opportunity to share what happened to her. And she's describing, this evening she's alone. Van Helsing's not there, but she's, sleeping with the garlic. And she hears this bat fluttering outside of her window. And we can all guess who the bat is, But her mom comes into her room concerned about her, and so her mom stays in the room with her. And there's that, that eeriness that remains, Lucy trying to feel confident that the garlic will protect her. Her mom's afraid. And of course, as has been noted by the characters in this book so many times, any sudden excitement, any surprise could be fatal for Lucy's mother and her condition. So, a scary evening alone is not the best setup right now. It's not the best situation to be in. And in fact, while they're in Lucy's room, a giant wolf crashes through the window. And this is enough to basically give Lucy's mother what I assume is a heart attack. Her heart fails and she passes. And Lucy's, she describes this dust coming into the room and kind of almost like falling under, she says there's a spell cast upon me, kind of falling under this hypnosis or some kind of control. She loses consciousness. So when she regains consciousness, her mother, of course, has passed and she's alone in the room. Whatever must have happened kind of got the attention of the servants of the house, and they all rush to Lucy's room, and they're, all worked up. So she recommends they go to the dining room and have a glass of wine to kind of calm their nerves. And she, waits a moment, then, realizes she would like them to come sit with her. She's terrified. Her mom has passed. I think she wants some help, some support. But when they don't come, she goes out to the dining room and finds that they have all fallen unconscious themselves. And it becomes apparent that someone has drugged the wine that they all drank. And so obviously someone has been involved. There's been tampering. This is something that's been kind of orchestrated so that Lucy would be alone and vulnerable. And then, Lucy sees the specks in the air again. We kind of have seen that before as something that Dracula uses to kind of transfix people, to control them, to hypnotize them. And so Lucy's basically like, I'm hiding this paper. Maybe someone will find it and know what happened. But she's kind of like counting on this potentially being her last testament, her last living account of what happened to her. And to go back to that wolf, something I haven't discussed yet, but mixed in with these, diary entries, notes, telegraphs, there's an article about a wolf that goes missing from a local kind of like zoo, like gardens. And it's the reporter going to talk to this man who tends to the animals. And basically he says that he's not sure how this wolf got out. It's kind of a mystery to him. He said normally the wolf's very content, he lives in the ground, so there doesn't seem to be an issue, but an odd man came to visit, a man fitting the description that we know now of Dracula, came to the gardens, and the wolf acted very agitated. It became clear that something about this man bothered the wolf, but just like that, something about the man, he was able to do something to calm the wolf immediately. And so it's kind of, the zookeeper indicating that he thinks this guy had something odd about him. It's important to the story. He's not sure exactly, but might be related to the wolf's disappearance. So we know that there was a loose wolf roaming around. So, it wouldn't be beyond reason that Dracula could command, as he's commanded other wolves, that wolf to go leap through the window as, another mechanism of his plan to get to Lucy. And then we hear at the end of the article, for some reason, as the journalist is interviewing the zookeeper, the wolf walks back in like nothing's happened. So I guess Dracula's done with him. He's released him back to go home. The wolf has served his purpose. So I'm connecting the dots here as Bram Stoker kind of wants us to do. And, assuming that Dracula summoned the wolf from the gardens so that he could have a way to get into the home, to kind of manipulate the situation Lucy's in, maybe inspire some fear, either to, keep her mother away, keep servants away, who knows. But he used this wolf. Again, it's that relationship to animals he has, this command over wolves that, again, I haven't seen in too many Dracula interpretations, but we do see it in Robert Eggers' Nosferatu film. I keep referencing that because that's the most recent version I've seen. But I also will say, I can't stop thinking of Willem Dafoe when I'm reading the Van Helsing character. I think that casting was spot on, really, really good. I think he's able to play this character who's disarming and warm, but also has that kind of like, you see that spark of genius in his head. He's kind of like odd, and that he's kind of thinking 10 steps ahead a little bit. So I also just want to say, I've been thinking about you, Willem, every time I'm reading about Van Helsing. You did a great job. I think the casting was great. Kudos. So anyway, back to the situation at hand. Unfortunately, when Seward and Van Helsing gain access inside the home, they find the scene as Lucy describes, the servants all unconscious. They see, they go up to the bedroom and they see, unfortunately, Lucy and her mother in the room. The mother has passed, and Lucy is not doing well. She is really not doing well. And they're, kind of frantic at this point. They realize that this happened because neither of them were able to be with Lucy. And now they need another blood transfusion, but Van Helsing, Arthur, and Dr. Seward at this point have all given their blood to Lucy. She keeps losing this blood. She keeps getting blood. And they're kind of at a loss of what they can do. They really need to get blood to her immediately. It's very important. Lucky for them, just at the moment, Quincy arrives. Good old Quincy, the American who also was a suitor of Lucy. And just a very minor character in the first part. He happens to come at that time, at that moment, when they need someone to give blood. Because he got a telegraph from Arthur, who's tending to his sick father. So he's unable to be present, for Lucy at this time. He gets a telegram to go visit and see what's going on. And so he comes in and, as much as they would like to have some discretion, maybe not share with Quincy what's going on out of, desire to keep it on the down low. They're kind of, Seward's like, you know what? I'm going to tell you just enough to convince you that I need your blood. I need to put your blood in Lucy. And Quincy's like, I love Lucy. Yeah, of course. Kind of no questions asked. Take my blood. And so now we have every man, all of our suitors have given blood to Lucy. They've all banded together to take care of her, to help her recover. And unfortunately, it's just not quite enough. Whatever happened this last evening really put Lucy over the tipping point. And so this blood sustains her for a little bit, enough for them to reach out to Arthur and request he come back so he can visit Lucy one last time. And he does. He does see her by the bedside. And in that moment, he's there at her bedside. Again, Van Helsing lets on that he knows what's happening before everyone else does. And he's like, Arthur, you may, go to your fiance's side, talk with her, but don't kiss her. And at one point, Arthur's sitting by Lucy, and Lucy kind of reaches up, and Van Helsing pulls Arthur back, knowing that Lucy is intended to bite Arthur. So Van Helsing, he knows what's happening with Lucy. He's seeing that she's not just dying of these ailments, some other transformations happening. She's succumbing to something else besides just this mysterious, continuous loss of blood. And we get some more hints of that, after she passes. They describe that she looks extremely lifelike. There's like color to her skin. She almost has more vibrancy to her than when she was alive because she was so sick. And the wounds on her neck have disappeared. And so it's clear that Van Helsing, he knows. He's pieced it together, and he's just, doing what he can to keep her alive. But he kind of, at different points, he kind of alludes that it's something bigger than just caring for Lucy, making sure she's not sick. He's kind of, he's approaching this as there's bigger things at stake. There are some bigger implications of this that the other characters are not privy to, obviously. But it seems like he knows that whatever's happening with Lucy is dangerous and could have very dire consequences. I'm going to try to kind of blast through the rest. So they have Lucy's funeral. Obviously very sad. She's buried with her mother. They find out that her mother left the family estate to Arthur, probably because he and Lucy were soon to be wed. So Arthur becomes in control of their estate, which is very advantageous for Van Helsing because he's able to request from Arthur that he get all of Lucy's writings so that he can study what was going on. He can know what was happening. Again, Van Helsing's very disarming. He presents himself as very humble, very, very friendly, just really trying to be there to figure out and help in any way he can. So he's kind of reaching out to Arthur, very tactfully to request that he get to see Lucy's papers. And Arthur doesn't really, push back. He lets him see them. I think he's kind of figured that Van Helsing has been such an important support, and he was trying to help Lucy so much that there's no reason not to trust him. And it's through these writings that Van Helsing is able to find Mina, Lucy's close friend, obviously, as we know, who's been in the dark about all this. Mina's been unaware of what's happening. She's kind of writing these letters that aren't getting responses. She's updating Lucy on what's happening. She's unaware of everything that's transpired. So she's kind of like, la la la, Lucy, here, I just want to update you what's going on. I shouldn't say la la la. There's some serious stuff happening on her end too, but she's unaware. In her last letters to Lucy, she's talking about how Jonathan's boss, they become friends. He lets them live with him in his house, and when he dies, shortly after they move in, he bequeaths everything to Jonathan, including obviously the law firm. And Jonathan's kind of holding this big responsibility now of running this law firm as a new lawyer himself. And they're very heartbroken over the loss of this man that they begin to view as family. And we learn this small detail about Mina that's dropped in that I think is going to be important, that she says she's never known parents. She's never had parents. So we know that Mina's an orphan. But, she's talking about that big shift for them, that loss. She's talking about Jonathan taking on new responsibilities at the law firm. And then she also talks about this experience they had where they're in the city in London and they see this man, and Jonathan kind of stops and becomes very concerned and nervous. And he keeps saying, that's the Count, it's the Count. Mina obviously doesn't know what this means, but he's obviously recognized Dracula, and it's upsetting him deeply. He's pretty much, he says he's forgotten everything that's happened. At least he's repressing it. And seeing this witnessing of Dracula in London is kind of bringing some of that back, and especially the anxiety for Jonathan. And Mina's very concerned. So she breaks her promise and reads that journal of Jonathan's to find out what's happening. And she's kind of like, I don't know what to think, because this is pretty horrible if it's true. And I just want to support my husband and help him get better. And that's what's most important to me. She's trying to figure out if this was part of his, his illness that he had when he went to the hospital, if he was kind of imagining things, or if, something as horrible as this could have really happened. So she does the smart thing and transcribes it. Smart Mina. We learned Mina's very smart. She's transcribing. She's recording details in her journal. She's being very thorough. She even knows train timetables. She is in the know. She's accumulating knowledge, so that she's prepared to do what she needs to do. So, finally, Van Helsing reaches out. He requests to meet with Mina and talk with her about Lucy. So that's how Mina finds out about Lucy, and she obviously, welcomes this opportunity to talk to Van Helsing. People don't really question Van Helsing. People don't push back. They're kind of just like, yeah, okay, you have credentials. That's very important, it seems like, in this book. Credentials, degrees. You seem like a man of knowledge and power. So yeah, whatever you say. And they meet and they talk, and Van Helsing, she lets him read Jonathan's journal because he's basically letting on that, something not natural, something not logical, as maybe people in this day and age would view it, is happening. And so Mina feels more confident that he might be able to make sense of what happened to Jonathan, because he seems to be open-minded, and he might, have some answers, because he's not shutting down the idea of the supernatural or the bizarre. And indeed, Van Helsing confirms to her after reading Jonathan's journal that yes, that's true, it's possible. He believes that happened to Jonathan, and that's a huge thing for Mina, a huge thing for Jonathan as well. Jonathan kind of talks about his journal comes back. He's writing again because this shift in having someone believe him, someone affirm that what happened to him was real, has caused a whole change in outlook. He's all of a sudden no longer anxious about it. He's not feeling that nervousness. because the assurance alone that he's not crazy, he's not making it up, has kind of shifted his whole perspective, and made him feel a little bit more empowered in trusting his experience, his perspective, his perception of reality. So that's a big, big development for Jonathan and Mina to have Van Helsing on their side. Kind of affirming that, yes, what happened is real, things are strange, and, all these pieces are kind of fitting together. And, in the background, we have some more developments with Renfield. He's kind of going through this trajectory. He tries to escape again and go to Dracula's estate, but he does not make it very far before, the staff of the hospital are able to apprehend him, and he, gets to this point where he's kind of relinquished himself to the idea that the master has forsaken him, has kind of rejected him, has left him, and I'm not sure why. It's not very clear as to why Dracula would, no longer, why Dracula would abandon Renfield in that way. Maybe Renfield's just not useful to him. Maybe Renfield's unable to help him in the way he needs, being locked up in this hospital. Who knows? But that's happened on the Renfield side of things. It's a little bit more of a background, secondary, tertiary, even plot point at this point. It doesn't come up quite as prominently. But another development. During this time, Lucy's passed. Mina's getting filled in on what's happening. They have the funeral. Dr. Seward's very sad. He's like, I maybe never will write again in this journal because Lucy's dead. He's very heartbroken. And they find out that children in town have been going missing in the night. And when they reappear, they have marks on their neck. And they talk about playing or being caught by the Bloofer lady. That's the figure that they attribute their missing time to. And the town's trying to figure out, is this kind of just like kids, all hearing about it, then becoming like a folk tale, and that's why they keep saying it, because they hear other kids talking about the Bloofer lady, and really they're just out wandering the streets, or there's another reason why they go missing overnight, just to come back home the next day. But it's odd because they all share the same account of the Bloofer lady, quotes in quotes, and they have the marks on their neck, small puncture marks that, people are trying to figure out, is it animals? We've seen those puncture marks before. We know that it's not animals, unfortunately. Something else is grabbing these kids and taking some of their blood. Obviously not to the point that they're dying because they are going home, but, these kids are being targeted by whoever the Bloofer lady is. And then at the very end of this section, Van Helsing goes to Seward and says, listen, have you put two and two together here? Like, have you figured it out? And Seward's kind of like a very, very logic-driven, science-based person. And so he's not really seeing the thread tying it together, because that thread is something that exists outside of what science can explain. And Van Helsing's kind of, in the very teacherly way, kind of leading him to this understanding. He's trying to lead him to know what's going on. Van Helsing's decided it's finally important that Seward have the whole picture of what's happening, or at least a bigger picture of what's happening. So he's leading him to the understanding. Finally, it gets to the point where he's saying, listen, John, listen, Dr. Seward, the person who is capturing those kids and biting them, it's Lucy. In case you haven't figured it out, that Lucy has become a vampire and that she was targeted by some other vampire who made her this way, that's, here's what's happening. So that's kind of where we end up. And I don't think that plot description was any shorter. So I'm so sorry. But I want to touch on a few things that happen in this section that, stuck out to me, either connect to themes before or start kind of new themes in the text. Maybe some things that I'm kind of not irritated by, but I hope they pan out differently than they have so far. Those kind of things. So one of them is the gender roles in this section. And, like I said, this is written in the Victorian era. Gender roles are very prescriptive and limited. But that's not to say that, authors can't be exploring them or pushing against those prescriptions and those limitations, which, maybe it's too much to ask, but I've been kind of hoping that this book might kind of start pushing at that. And I see some possibility that's happening, but a lot of in this section, I have some questions about whether or not that's the case, and primarily because women in this portion, particularly Lucy, are described as being these beautiful, pure, victims of this like gruesome thing that's happening. They're kind of like the victims of sacrifice, the loss that happens because of this like dark evil. And Lucy, she's often discussed as being very beautiful. She's this very lovable, beautiful woman that all these men pine for. So she's kind of like um this symbol, this target of affection. And I don't think that that's a particularly progressive stance, obviously, description. I don't know what's going to happen now that she's a vampire, and I'll be curious to see, but I kind of see that she's, this very agreeable, lovable, pure girl that is subject to this evil beyond her control. And I don't want to oversimplify Lucy. Like, I obviously, you know, there are other aspects to her, but that seems to be kind of like a part of how she's described, and that's kind of traditional. It's kind of this commonplace role in that women play in narratives like this, and I think that also plays into all of these men who pine for her and come in to save her and try to be her saviors. And the fact that there are three of them, and Van Helsing is talking about, oh, we need the blood of three strong men to save Lucy, and how they're like supposed to be these heroes that come in and save the day. I mean, obviously they don't. They're unsuccessful, and I don't know if that's because what they're facing is something larger than just the typical risks, typical dangers of the world. So maybe, you could say it's kind of a failed experiment. That way men aren't able to save Lucy. It's not these strong men that are able to bring her back. So maybe, I'm open to that interpretation. But I also see that play out in how Van Helsing interacts with Mina. And, he goes to her home and asks to see Jonathan's writings and to see her writings of the time so he can have that account of Lucy. And, he's praising Mina as being this person of such great virtue, that she's really, such an important, virtuous person right now because she's providing the help that they need to accomplish this. And again, women have very often been used as symbols of virtue, of a specific type of morality, of goodness in stories. So again, kind of this use of this common trope for women. Van Helsing seems to bring a lot of that old-fashioned thinking into the narrative. He's kind of playing with the guys like it's a guys club. Like, hey, we're all dudes. We're strong dudes. Let's help this girl. And he kind of sees that they're these men that love Lucy, and he kind of manipulates that to be able to get from them what he needs to carry out his plan for combating whatever it is afflicting Lucy. And so he's kind of playing with that. Even Seward's affection for Lucy, he, taps into that to get him to take care of her, to do the things he needs to do to solve what the problem is. Unfortunately, again, they're unsuccessful in that because Lucy dies and then becomes, I mean, we can read between the lines, Lucy becomes a vampire. So I do see that play out with Van Helsing, and I don't know if it's him using that as a tool, again, to get to meet his ends, or if he is kind of this older character who has a more old-fashioned perspective. I don't know yet. I think there's more book to be read, more things to happen where we can see that play out. Um, but those are things I noticed. I also think it's interesting the three men who love Lucy coming in, they all are pumping their blood into her. Obviously, very darkly romantic part of the book. I was a Hot Topic emo kid. Like, there's something very, very. It's a gothic romance book. I mean, it's a gothic novel. We know that. So there is that element of they love her so much they're giving their blood for her, and goth kids love that. Again, me included. I was that Hot Topic kid. Um, but you know, Arthur doesn't know that the other men gave their blood. He thinks he's the only one, and so he kind of talks about how he basically feels he and Lucy were married because he did such an intimate thing as give her his blood. And Van Helsing and Seward are kind of like, we can't let him know that we all gave blood because he's viewing this as such a symbolic, romantic, intimate thing, a way of kind of consummating their relationship without the traditional way of doing that. And so that's another added element, another added weirdness to the story of all of these men showing deep affection for her in this way and all having this weird bond to her now where all of their blood is in her, and um, what kind of power she might have over them after that. That's what I'm wondering. Will she have some kind of power over them? Will that give her some kind of influence or sway over them? Um, I don't know. We'll see. Um, as I was reading this, I also noticed this anxiety of transition, of change. You have Van Helsing, who was a mentor, and Seward being a student, and him, being this person who's figuring it out and trying to get his student to help him solve this mystery. Van Helsing obviously is a man of science. He's a doctor, but he, is also open to the supernatural, and he puts importance into that which science doesn't explain necessarily. He's kind of saying we can't overlook that because obviously in this case that's what's happening. So kind of this connection to paranormal interpretations and scientific interpretations. But there's also, in Jonathan's story, his mentor dies suddenly, and Jonathan all of a sudden inherits this law office, and he's very anxious about his ability to manage it. And so this transition of power from one generation to the next there, I mean, again, it seems like such a subtle part, but I can't think that it was just included for no reason. And Jonathan's a kind of unconfident character. He does some bold things in the first section, but again, he's inexperienced and he's young, and the fact that he can't trust his own perception of events, that his own narrative comes under question in his own eyes, and it isn't until Van Helsing, again, this established man of science, um, validates his story that he gets, that sense of confidence, that boost of strength again. And so there's this like trepidation, this hesitation with Jonathan, which is, we'll be curious as the story plays out as they're facing this big, dark, evil entity. Will he maintain his sense of confidence and strength, or will he falter, and is he characterized this way for a reason? There's another small detail, and again, you don't want to put weight on everything, but this was included again for a reason. Jonathan talking to Van Helsing and kind of pointing out that he must be a very wise man because he has these bushy eyebrows. Or Van Helsing kind of notes like, oh, you're a physiognomist? I think it's physiognomist. And, I want to point out physiognomy, if that's how you pronounce it, kind of like using physical features, traits to describe or get insight into the character of a person. Not very far off from phrenology, and these are very pseudoscience, racist, not good practices. obviously that's shady and bad, and was very popular in Victorian times. Like phrenology, the study of the skull, to tell you things about the person. Um, it was popular as a popular practice, but that does not diminish the fact that it was based in pseudoscience. It's not a real science. It's problematic. So just putting that there. Problematic science. But uh I've been reading this book with my friend, and he kind of pointed out that Van Helsing's reaction to that seems to be less like, oh, that's cool, that's interesting, kind of more of like, oh, pat on the head, like, oh, you're a physiognomist. All right. Like, as his way of maybe showing that Jonathan is not as, I don't want to say as intelligent, but maybe, yeah, maybe not as smart, or maybe what he puts credence into is not correct sources of knowledge. And I think Van Helsing's becoming aware of that. So Jonathan's this interesting character of lack of confidence. I have a lack of confidence in him. He has lack of confidence in himself. Mina seems to have lots of confidence in him, and good, you love him. He's your husband. I, was a little bit curious about how this fits into different literary movements. Obviously, this is a Gothic novel. I think it's pretty apparent that Dracula is a Gothic novel. It's like a prime example of a Gothic novel, and it's a little bit too early for modernism. Um, I mean, modernism began in the late 19th century, but um, I think, I was reading up on it. It seems like Virginia Woolf, the like early 1900s seems to be more solidly modernism. So I'm not trying to claim this is a modernist novel, but I do wonder if some anxiety about the transition between old to new, and this the social trajectory seems to be a source of tension in this book. I think, something they talk about with modernism is often, romanticism is a lot about these big esoteric truths, this big dramatic, finding these truths in the world. You have um, very classically romantic stories like Frankenstein. And this is, Gothic literature is very rooted in romanticism. And then modernism is kind of toying with the idea of the search for truth. Um, and I kind of feel like this book might be kind of on the cusp of both. I think you have uh, this big dark evil force that's entering this world of these characters, and it's looming, and they're on this journey to defeat it, or obviously that's probably the end goal. Right now they're on the journey to understand what's going on, and this is a force from how the book describes it. Again, there's this big separation between West and East, and there's this exoticization of the East, and the East kind of being like the old country, and like Dracula being of old aristocratic ways, and London being more of a urban metropolis, this of a city center. And so I know I can kind of see that conflict there too, of old versus new, of this um, you know, of this clash in the story. Um, so yeah, I'm wondering if this book might be, since it's kind of it's before modernism really takes a foothold, but if it's not taking a nod from some of the uh, trends of this departing from these old classical traditional epic searches for truth and for moral stories, for moral narratives, for these grand explorations of what it means to be human, things like that. And maybe it's toying more with what we're going to find there, if we're going to find answers there. So I don't know, find out. Again, like I said, we're lots of more book to read. We're about halfway now. So we got lots more to explore, lots more to read. I could be completely wrong, and the next half might fool me And that's fine. I would love to hear what you think. You know, if you got some insight. Also, I need to do more research into what's happening in Ireland at this time. Um, you know, that's where Bram Stoker's from. So I don't know if there's some social, historical things specific to the context in which this book was written that might give insight into that. So hopefully before next time I read it, I will read into that more and have a better response to that. But if you know, like let me know. Tell me what you think. I'm also, before the last two sections, going to do a little bit more research into the vampire lore in this book and what Bram Stoker brought in from existing vampire lore and maybe what he embellished or inserted. Because that's something I don't know and I'm curious about. How much vampire lore came before this book that he's borrowing from and how much came from this book. Obviously, this book has been hugely culturally significant in how we view vampires. Again, this is a Euro-American specific lens of vampires. They're culturally distinct interpretations of vampires around the world too. But this book obviously has had a huge impact. So hopefully by next time or the last installation of this series, I'll have some of those answers. But if you know, again, I want to hear from you. Tell me what you know, what you think. There might be some Dracula scholars out there who can tell me. But I hope you enjoy reading it if you're reading it. And like I said, I'm going to release 2 videos next week about this book. And once I'm done with this book, I'm going to watch Bram Stoker's Dracula the movie with Gary Oldman. I have not seen it yet. So maybe I'll be able to, comment on that a little bit. Who knows? If you've seen that movie and enjoy it, let me know. If you didn't like it, don't tell me. I'm still going to watch it anyway. All right. Well, you can tell me, but I'm still going to watch it. Anyways, I'll catch you next time, and thanks for watching.